Bob Cafaro is a cellist with the Philadelphia Orchestra. He became severely disabled due to aggressive multiple sclerosis and restored his health without drugs. He is here this morning to share his remarkable story, so please welcome Bob.
So, just to give you a quick summary for those of you that weren't here yesterday, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Wahls for having me here today. This has just been beyond my expectations, things I never thought would happen in my life. One of them was dealing with multiple sclerosis. In December of 1998, I had just turned 40 years old, and I got a strange, unexpected numbness in my right leg, something I had never experienced. I started limping. Doctors thought it was just a pinched nerve, nothing to worry about. 2 months later, peripheral vision loss in my left eye, optic neuritis. And that's when I received my first diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. The neurologist I saw was an epilepsy specialist, so obviously it was out of his area of expertise. He did not know what he was doing. I sought a second opinion. The NIH, my brother-in-law worked there, set me up with Fred Loveland, who was one of the prominent neurologists in the country. He's now head of MS neurology at Mount Sinai, and he tested me for everything. Everything came back negative, found 3 small lesions in the spinal cord. So I still didn't want to believe this. And 4 months later, I started to lose peripheral vision in my right eye. And I got on intravenous steroids for the second time. And I was still in basically a state of denial about it. And then things went off the edge of the cliff for me. I wound up getting motion sick, and I couldn't keep food or water down for a week. I was hospitalized for 4 days for severe dehydration. When I was released from the hospital, I was unable to move both my hands. I was legally blind in both eyes. I was incontinent. My body felt like it was receiving electrical current. I was hearing helicopters all the time. I could hardly walk, and forget playing the cello. It was a disaster. Everything was gone. I saw my neuro-ophthalmologist at Wills Eye Hospital and gave me a basic vision test and a visual field test, and both were just a complete failure. And he said, "I'll write you a note for permanent disability." And at that point, I made a decision that I was going to find my own answers out of this, that medicine and neurology had overlooked, because it basically proved futile for the previous 8 months. So let me show you where I was here. And for those of you that don't know how to read an MRI, I had over 50 active lesions in my brain. I counted 53, plus a lot of cloudiness too. And I circled those in red for anyone that can see. The brain was just a complete mess. And up there on the top right, we have a town hall meeting of 5 of them together. And this is basically my, the king of lesions here. This is, that lesion in my spinal cord measured 3.5 centimeters in length. And it took up the entire spinal cord. And that explained why I was completely debilitated in every way. The brain was cut off from the body. So what do you do? This is 1999. If I had the Wahls Protocol, I'm sure that would have been a major help for me. Terry Wahls wouldn't be diagnosed with MS for 1 year, and her book, The Wahls Protocol, wouldn't come out for the next 15 years. So basically, I was on my own, and I was going to find my own answers. What do I do? I'm not a doctor. I have no background in medicine, biology, science, pharmacology. You give me a cello, that's what I know. I started my own research, and one of the first things I found was a book by Dr. Batman, as I call him. Anybody who speaks Farsi, I could use a pronunciation course here. But Your Body's Many Cries for Water, and I found his website, The Water Cure, and I started drinking half my body weight in ounces of water a day. And this was something new, and right away I felt my first signs of improvement, and I wasn't experiencing my dreaded 4th MS attack. And it's interesting to note that I don't drink water out of the plastic bottles. There's a whole, that's an industry in itself, but I carry my own filter with me, and I drink water only out of stainless steel bottles at home. We have a very good reverse osmosis filter, and I think that's really important, that you drink that amount of water and you think of the source of your water. Another thing is having with the Philadelphia Orchestra for so many years, we go to Japan on a regular basis, and I researched worldwide rates of MS, and I noticed that Japan had far lower rates of MS than other Western countries. And what's interesting is that I have been there and they have serious overcrowding, they have serious environmental issues, but yet their rates of MS are a fraction of ours. And if you think of, I started to look at other factors at diet, and then I also stumbled upon the Okinawa centenarian study where they studied over 900 people that were over the age of 100 in perfect health. And it's interesting, in this study, the women didn't screen for breast, ovarian, cervical cancers. The men don't have the heart disease, the prostate cancers. MS is totally unknown to them. They basically don't suffer any of the Western illnesses. One thing about the Okinawa centenarian study, the people in this study live on a very low-calorie diet, and they only eat till they're 80% full. So that was some research I came up with my own. Another thing, there's a book of short stories on the right there, and one I read as a child and it stayed with me. It's called The Doctor's Heroism. And it's about a man who's diagnosed with a terminal illness, and there's no hope for this man. And the doctor says, there's only one hope: if you go to a warm climate and eat nothing but watercress for 6 months. And 6 months later, this man returns and the doctor doesn't recognize him. He's in perfect health. And I know it's a short story, but I basically took this to heart and I started living on raw watercress. And Dr. Wahls agreed with me on this one, that, you know, it was funny. So let's move on to some of the other things I did. Said, not to quote our great president, but said, the standard American diet. And if you think that how much salt, fat, and sugar we consume, and 90% of the sugar in the standard American diet does not come from natural sources. It comes from additives to make the food taste sweeter. And you look at the high concentrations of everything that we shouldn't be eating. And if you look at the basic Japanese diet, lower calories, as we said, but much purer food. It's basically a rice, fish, vegetable-based diet. If they do eat meat, you know, very small amounts to enhance the food, not the big steak hanging off the edge of the plate, as we know in the West. So I basically revamped my entire diet, and I cut out all processed food. I stopped eating meat, all dairy. I stopped drinking soda, you know, forget anything like smoking, alcohol. That was, the night I was diagnosed was my last drink of alcohol, and that was 18 years ago. So basically, I've taken Dr. Wahls' advice before it was given to me, and I live on a hunter-gatherer diet. But moving on, some of the other things. Avonex. I was on this drug, and for me, the drug was not proving effective. And you know, again, I'm not telling people to get off drugs. That's a decision that you make with your doctor. But for me, this drug was brutal because you have to give up 1 day a week. It's this big intramuscular injection. The next day, you have the case of the flu so bad that your hair hurts, and you have to take a leave or you know, whatever it is, Advil, to basically counter the effects of this drug. So that makes one wonder, you know, a drug that makes you that sick, is it really helping your body to heal? What caught me about this was one day I read the packet insert that came with the drug. And what stopped me in my tracks was that after 2 years in this study, this is the clinical trial study run by Avonex, there was one exacerbation was experienced by 26 people out of 85 in the drug group, and in the placebo group, it was 26 out of 87. So here you had an identical success rate after 2 years with the placebo group and the drug group. So this one really stopped me in my tracks, and I started researching other clinical trial studies and looking at a disproportionately high success rate with the placebo groups in these trials. And that's what makes MS one of the more difficult diseases to come up with effective medication for. So science and medicine write this off as an anomaly, but to me it wasn't. To me, I'm going to find what's going on. Why do these people in this placebo group get better? What can I do to get better? The Silva Method, this was something I found researching You the Healer, and it's about training the brain to make changes in the body. And anyone who doesn't believe this is possible should look at the minoxidil clinical trial study. Minoxidil is Rogaine. Everyone knows that. When they did the clinical trial study for Rogaine, 18% of the men in the placebo group started growing hair where they didn't have it. So if you're a non-believer, you have to explain that. I started meditating 2 30-minute sessions a day, that my MS was going into remission, that these active lesions throughout my brain and spinal cord were healing, they were disappearing, that my brain was finding new pathways to the muscles, that my optic nerves were regenerating. So I did this for 2 30-minute sessions a day for 2 years. I sat quietly with no distractions, training my brain to make physical changes to my body. Other things I did was I looked to people who accomplished the impossible. And these are things that you would say, humanly impossible, people cannot do it. And if we look at your most basic example here, in May 6, 1954, the first person to run a mile in under 4 minutes was Roger Bannister. Okay, and he was a British medical student at the time. Ironically, he went on to become a neurologist. He's 87 years old now, and that's a picture of Roger Bannister in Oxford with my book. And I talk about him as your most basic example of someone who does something everyone said it was impossible. Doctors, athletes, the human body cannot run a mile in under 4 minutes. He did it, 1954. 2 months later, his record was broken. Now you've had almost 20 people run a mile in under 4 minutes, including 2 people at the high school level. So once an impossibility is achieved, it becomes an achievable goal for the rest of us. So that was something I looked for. Going back here, Nando Araujo, I had the privilege of meeting him in 2013, and he actually wrote something for my book. In 1972, a rugby team was going from Montevideo, Uruguay, over to Chile on the west side of South America, and they were going over the longest mountain range in the world. And I've been to this mountain range, I've flown over it, and I've been basically in the foothills. These are some of the most difficult mountain ranges in the world. The plane crashed in the winter. Tail wings were broken off. Plane landed like a sled. It was just a 1 in a million shot. When the deceleration, everything went forward. Nando was thrown from row 9 into the bulkhead. His skull was fractured in 4 places. He's covered with blood. He had no pulse. They put him in the body with the people who perished because there was no hope for him. They put him in the cold, rather. And 3 days later, Nando awoke from his coma. And 72 days after the crash, Nando showed up in the foothills, and he had gone 37.5 miles through this mountain range. He had never seen snow. He had no survival training. He had no equipment. He had no food. But yet, what he did, mountain climbing teams that reconstructed his route said what this guy did was not possible. And if you put Nando Araujo in a clinical trial placebo group, he gets better. That's my point, that he has that ability of his brain to supersede the limits of what is possible. Nolan Ryan, on the right, that's his book, Nolan Ryan's Pitcher's Bible. Nolan Ryan did the impossible by staving off the aging process of the human body for 25 years. And when Nolan Ryan was 44, he threw his 7th no-hitter, and in that game, he was still throwing the ball 96 miles per hour. So he worked out, and he earned that right to stave off that aging process. And in that book, Nolan Ryan's Pitcher's Bible, he details everything about his exercise regimen, his diet, his lifestyle, mental discipline, everything. So I've essentially adopted his lifestyle, and I live like an athlete getting ready for my next game. When I was basically told I was going to be on permanent disability, I had no physical strength. I couldn't even lift a 45-pound bar with no weights on it. And I started lifting weights, according to Nolan Ryan's book. And I started, as my strength built, I incrementally added weights 5 pounds at a time. And now every morning I bench 135 pounds. I do handstands, chin-ups. So One of the other things I did was I started cycling. It was a miracle to me that I could still balance on 2 wheels, and I didn't think I could. But here I was shocked to find out I still had a sense of balance. And I started, aggressively trying to rebuild my central nervous system with cycling, and I'm sure that's something Dr. Wahls can relate very well to, right? Because when you're cycling, you're exercising everything about your central nervous system, your decision-making, your reflexes, your balance, right? And you're exercising your cardiovascular system, everything about the body. It's really a complete form of exercise and physical therapy as well. So moving on to Roger, we talked about. Here's a picture of the survivors that were up at 11,500 feet in the winter, and they were up there for 72 days. And it was basically Nando who rescued the entire group. It was his will, his refusal to give up in a situation that was just completely lost. Let's move on here. Other people that accomplished the impossible that I had studied. I was really into chess for a while, and I studied Bobby Fischer's games. He wrote a book, My 60 Memorable Games. And Bobby Fischer was an anti-Semite, he was a misogynist, he was crazy, he could probably be an effective leader of this country today. He did something that was humanly impossible because he didn't just win a chess match, he beat an entire nation, an entire culture, and he did it on his own. And when you study his games, Bobby Fischer, chess was not a game to him. This was a fight for his survival. It was life and death for him. And for me, basically, I emulated these people. Like, I was Nando Araujo up on the mountain. I was Bobby Fischer trying to wrest the title from the Soviets, who had devoted all resources to keeping that title in Soviet hands. This was in 1972, by the way. Another one, Lance Armstrong, and it's very unfortunate that we know Lance Armstrong is a liar and a cheat and a druggie, but his cancer, his testicular cancer, metastasized so quickly, it went into his lungs and his brain, and he had brain surgery to remove the cancer from his brain, and the doctors told him that he would never ride a bike again after the surgery, and they privately confided he had a 20% chance of survival from his cancer. That's how advanced it was. Not only did he completely beat his cancer, but he returned to, a very serious athlete in the world's most competitive event. And beyond that, he had help, we all know. But as far as the mindset, I could probably tell Lance Armstrong some things about Lance that he doesn't know, but for him, cancer was not a disease. Cancer was another race that he would win. And in his mind, he will win everything that he does. And that's the kind of person he is. So in that sense, we can all learn a lot from him as far as his attitude toward a disease that should have killed him. So moving on here, other experiences that I used, I went backpacking in 1985 and I was in Shenandoah National Park. I came out of the woods after 3 days, and that's a reconstruction of what I remember. It was a sign, a picture of a deer. Do not feed a deer. When you feed a deer human foods such as chips and candy, you reduce its lifespan by 30%. So that stayed with me, when I hear looking for my own answers out of this MS trap. And my question was, are we physiologically that different than a deer that we can eat chips and candy and expect no ill effects from it? So that was something that really changed my whole diet completely. Here, this is a restaurant that opened up where Teresa and I live back in South Jersey outside Philly. And all you can eat, right? And that says it all. That's basically the American society. And I strongly believe that overeating is one of the single worst things you can do to your body, because when you take in more calories than your body's able to use, free radicals are released, and that becomes the seedbed for just all kinds of illnesses. And one thing I read was a study about, you took, I think it was rabbits, it was mice, rats, and even fruit flies. When they cut their caloric intake in half, they doubled their lifespan. So that was another thing. And you look at the Okinawa centenarian study, these people over the age of 100, right? They all had a very reduced caloric intake. especially compared to the West, right, in our all-you-can-eat society. So I started really reducing my caloric intake. In addition to the water that I would drink, I wasn't even aware of this, but I was fasting every day for 12 to 15 hours, going without food, because there's no room in your stomach with all the water you're drinking. And even now, it was actually, I thank Dr. Wahls, because she got me back to fasting 1 day a week. So I fast for 36 hours, 1 day a week now. And it's part of the discipline. I'm living on a low-calorie diet. I'm at my ideal body weight now, 150 pounds. So, and I want to stay there, so thank you, Dr. Wahls. She's keeping me on track here. So, all you can eat. If you're into overeating, there's a contest here in Des Moines, Iowa on August 12th, and it's the famous hot dog eating contest. And to me, that says it all about American society. We have competitive eating. And unfortunately, this has even gotten its way into Japan now. They have a gyoza eating contest. And I'm looking at this, hello. But there you go. So if you're into overeating, you might want to join. So 70% of the diet in the Okinawa centenarian study was sweet potatoes, and I don't think they had Monsanto sweet potatoes in those days. So here I live on organic sweet potatoes, and that's really a lot of my diet. I'm on the road a lot with the orchestra, Philadelphia Orchestra, right? I'm on the road 3 weeks a year that we're overseas, and we do a lot of traveling. What do I do when I'm overseas, and what do I do when I'm traveling? Right? In the Wahls Protocol, Dr. Wahls talks about the importance of eating local food because, right, local food is higher in vitamins, nutrients, right? So the magic of dehydration. I dehydrate food and I take it with me. And by the way, Teresa and I have set up a table out there where my books are, and we're going to offer samples of how I live when I travel, all dehydrated food. This spring I was in China, and I ate a total of 3 meals out in 3 weeks. The rest of the time I just was the hunter-gatherer with the dehydrated food, right? So other food that I dehydrate here, you can see organic blueberries. I get them when they're in season from my local grower. We have a good relationship with our farmer in South Jersey, and they're so serious about organic farming, it's like a religion to them. So I get blueberries, I get strawberries and other produce here from this farmer, and then I dehydrate it, and that is a great way to preserve it for 1 year or longer. There's no moisture in the food. One of the things, I was very weak and I had no strength, and ginger, I found fresh ginger. It was funny, when I was in the hospital, there was a neurologist there. I told him how I was so weak and I had no strength, and he said, well, yeah, we have drugs that'll fix that. And, I think there's a better way sometimes. And I found that eating fresh organic ginger is it's so invigorating, it's revitalizing. So I keep dehydrated ginger with me at all times. And when I feel weak, just put a piece under your tongue. Whew, it's like smelling salt. So you might want to try a piece of that. We'll have it out there. What's interesting is, organic food now, I got that at BJ's Wholesale Club, and even the big box stores are beginning to see the wisdom of organic food a little bit. So, in 2013, let's just go back here because I started doing all this hydration. I changed my diet completely. I was working out. Every morning I start with a yoga session. I lift weights, I do handstands, chin-ups, and I cycle every day. So I live a very disciplined lifestyle, right? No recreational drugs, no alcohol. I drink only water, and I eat very little food. I fast 1 day a week. So what happened was I went to my neurologist after 3 years after those MRIs, and I was just improving and improving. And he said to me, walk across the room, and I did, because in 3 years earlier when he told me to walk across the room, I was, could hardly do it, and then he said, close your eyes, and I stumbled. I couldn't even stand up with my eyes closed. So 3 years later, he says, walk across the room. I did. He says, now walk back. And he said, wow, that looks better. And I said, watch this, and I got down on the floor and I did a handstand. And he went and got other neurologists and said, do that again. And after they left, he said, now tell me what you're doing. And I told him all about what I was doing with diet and hydration and everything, and he says, great. He says, let's get another MRI. I want to make sure the Avonex is working. So at that point, I didn't go back to him for 11 years. And when I met Nando, something happened because for the first time, I met one of these people who had accomplished the impossible. And when he gave me a hug, I felt like I had joined the ranks of these people who had done something impossible. And I went back to my neurologist at UPenn, and he did a complete series of MRIs, and when he looked at the results, he said, you did the impossible. So there you can see I had that 3.5 centimeter lesion in the spinal cord, and it's no longer there. And here, the brain scans, you can see there are no lesions in the brain today. But, you know, Dr. Wahls, I was fortunate to meet Dr. Wahls in December. I was getting ready for a TED Talk I did, and they told me to watch 2 TED Talks. And when I saw Dr. Wahls' TED Talk, I was like, whoa. So she contacted me coincidentally a week later, and I picked Dr. Wahls up at LaGuardia Airport in New York, and we spent the afternoon together. And it was just so enlightening because she explained why all these things I did were the right moves. So anyway, one thing, you know, I've basically gotten my body back completely on my hands, but I want to show you a picture, and this was taken 2.5 weeks ago, and this was in Vail, Colorado, where the orchestra plays at Vail Festival. And I do it every year. I bike from Vail Village up to the top of Vail Pass, and that's 16 miles, and it's a 2,500-foot climb. And you've got to be in really good condition to do this. So for a 59-year-old man with MS who's So anyway, what I'd like to do, I was just going to speak today, but Dr. Wahls asked me to play something because when I met Dr. Wahls and we spent the afternoon together, it was my privilege to give Dr. Wahls a private performance. So anyway, this is a little something here that was on the request list from the doc. So this is a fantasy on Danny Boy, or London Derriere for solo cello.
Thank you.